Hi Year 9, Mr. Tapley here for your next lesson of Year 9 Humanities. This lesson we are looking at developing our understanding of the structure, so what does it look like, and the role and responsibilities, so what do they do, of Australian Parliament. Success criteria is to explain the purpose of Australian Parliament, so why do we have Parliament, what do they do, and to outline the structure of the bicameral system. It's a word you're going to hear this lesson. Bicameral system is the system of government we have in Australia. And if you're after a bit of extra information on Australian Parliament, I recommend watching that video at the bottom there, just 2 minutes long, and it's a good explanation of the different parts of Parliament. So, this graphic up the top right here is also very useful for understanding who makes up the Australian Parliament. It's important to remember that Parliament and government are two different things. Yeah, so Parliament is all of the political members, all of the politicians that have been elected. And government is just the winners, the winning team. So the guys who have won the election. We've got the Prime Minister, who's the head of the government. So Parliament, all politicians, government, some. Anyway, Australian Parliament is a bicameral system. That means there are two houses, two levels of Parliament. And in recognition of our connection to Britain, the Parliament also has a representative of the Queen. So we have the House of Reps, which is the lower house, the Senate, which is the upper house, and the Governor General, who is the representative of the Queen. So if you're thinking bicameral, think bicycle, think biplane. So bi is two, cameral, you can think of the crown, the Queen, and that makes up the two levels. So bi, two houses, two levels of Parliament, and then cameral is our connection to the crown. If you remember back to the Federation lessons, we were founded by Britain. All the colonies of Australia, individual colonies were founded by Britain. When we came together with Federation, we actually had to ask Britain for permission to become our own country. And the Australian Constitution was signed by the British government. It was signed by the British Parliament because we didn't have a government of our own to make that law. So that's our recognition to Britain. We don't obviously have as much in common with them now because it's been 100 years since we've signed that constitution, but it's still part of our Parliament. So we've got the House of Representatives, the Senate, and the Governor General. And the Australian Parliament has four main roles or responsibilities, four main things that they're supposed to do. The first thing is to propose and create new laws. So that's obviously important to running a country. So the Parliament will propose a law, which is a bill. So before a law has become a law, before it is passed, it's called a bill. You might know that if you've done the So You Want to Be a Lawyer elective for Year 9, or if you're looking at legal studies in VCE. So a bill is proposed by a Parliament member. Anyone can propose a law, a bill. It is debated, it is voted upon, and then if it's passed by the lower and the upper house and the Governor General, the bill becomes a law. The second thing that the Parliament does is that they will scrutinise the actions of the government. So the government, again, isn't all of the Parliament politicians, all the members. It's just the winning team. And the Parliament is there to question the government's decision, hold them accountable, responsible for their actions. If our Parliament was only made up of the guys who won in the election, then they could kind of get away with doing whatever they wanted. They could do some dodgy things and no one else would be there to say, hey, that guy's doing the wrong thing, we should call him out on it. So Parliament is there to scrutinise the government, to criticise. The third thing they do is form the government. So when we get into voting and the election process, you'll find out a bit more about this. But basically, every election, politicians put their hand up and say, I would like to be part of Parliament. And then the political party with the most members voted in to the lower house, so the House of Representatives, they form the government. So it's not like a 1v1 competition between Scott Morrison and then the head of the Labour Party. It's whoever gets the most political members voted into the House of Reps. So in our last election, the Liberal Party had the most amount of political members in the House of Reps, in the lower house. And that meant their leader, the Prime Minister Scott Morrison, was the Prime Minister. It meant that they formed the government. So it's important that we have Parliament because they form the government, and the government are responsible for doing a lot of things. But we'll get into that in a later lesson. And then finally, the last thing that Parliament do is represent the people. We are a democracy of the people, by the people, for the people. The actions of Parliament members should be to protect the people's interests and concerns. So if the people of Australia are voting politicians in, and they're saying to the politicians, we want you to legalize gay marriage. Then it's up to Parliament to then propose a law, create a new law that represents the people's views, the people's wishes, their wants. They then need to pass the law, and then that law will be enforced. So basically they're there to fulfill the wishes. They're a genie of the people. So we're going to look at both the House of Reps, so the lower house, and then the Senate, the upper house. So the House of Reps has 151 Parliament members, so 151 politicians are elected every election, and they serve 3-year terms. So every 3 years we have a new election to determine if we get new politicians, new Parliament members, or if we keep the same blokes from last time. And each of those members, we didn't just pick a number out of a hat, each of those members represents one electorate, so one local council or region. So for example, Mount Waverley, Glen Waverley is the electorate of Chisholm. Funny name, I know, you've probably never heard it before, but that's basically one region of neighborhoods. Like we don't have 151 suburbs in House of Reps, we don't have the Glen Waverley rep, we have someone who looks after Glen Waverley and then a couple of other suburbs nearby. So we have 151 electorates in Australia, and each of the Parliament members in the House of Reps represents one of them. So it's kind of like your local politician. Our local politician is Gladys Liu. She came into school actually last year. We've got her in the yearbook. Anyway, after an election, the political party with the majority of electorate members voted into the House of Reps forms the government. And then the leader of that party is the Prime Minister, the PM. So you can see I've got a little graphic down here. Tells you a little bit about the House of Reps. It's been mentioned in the previous slide though, so I'm not going to go into it in too much detail. The Senate, or the upper house, is formed by 76 Parliament members, and each of them serve 6-year terms. So they serve for a bit longer than the old mates in the House of Reps, and there's fewer of them, 76 Parliament members. Why that is because those guys aren't representing local regions, local suburbs, local electorates. In the Senate, it's also known as the States House. So it's easy to remember because S for Senate, S for States. So the 76 Parliament members in the Senate represent the states and territories of Australia. The House of Reps members represent their electorates, but Senates represent the interests and concern of the states and territories. So you will have a senator for Victoria, but you'll have a House of Reps member for Chisholm, for Mount Waverley and Glen Waverley. You can't be the senator of Glen Waverley. So there'll be senators for Tasmania, for Victoria, for Sydney, etc., etc. Both of the houses have similar roles and responsibilities. They're both basically doing the same thing. However, the difference is who they are representing. So the Senate represent the states, so they deal with kind of bigger issues than the local politicians. So that's a bit of information about your beloved Australian Parliament. What I'd like you to do this lesson is to read the Australian Parliament fact sheet, and I'll show you where that is before I go any further. Bonk. So I did have that Levels of Government PDF just chilling by itself. What I've done, because there's actually a couple that we'll be using from the same website, is I've put them all in one place for you guys to find. So you can see that's the one we looked at in our last lesson. We've got one for the Constitution, which I found, which is useful revision tool for when we look at that later. And this is the one we're using today, the Australian Parliament PDF. If you click on that, you'll see it gives you some information about the House of Reps, about Parliament, making laws, etc., etc., etc. So have a read of that to answer these 4 questions. Question 1, outline the main roles and responsibilities of Australian Parliament. Question 2, what is the bicameral system of government used in Australia? So you're outlining the parliament structure there, so who makes up a bicameral system of government? Question 3, what is an electorate? You have to be careful about that one. I'm sure a lot of people are just going to say Glen Waverley. It's not. What is an electorate? And then identify the electorate that your home is located in and that your local parliament member is representing. So if you use that website there, it takes you to this little useful website here. Find my electorate. So let's say I'm looking for Mount Waverley. I go find. Did that work? It did. So if I'm in Mount Waverley and I'm living in postcode 3149, I can go to Chisholm and you'll see that my local member is Gladys Liu. So that's how you complete that question there. And then finally, question 4 is to fill in the blanks. Only 2 words I'm looking for here, really. So the House of Representatives, the lower house, represents the interests of blank. And then the Senate, the upper house, represent the interests of blank. And then the bonus question, which you don't have to do, was just something silly from last year that I forgot to take out. What movie is this image on the right referencing there? Someone saying, I am the Senate. Anyway, that's all you're doing this lesson, guys. If you have any questions or concerns, please let me know. Otherwise, best of luck. Hope you're all well. And cheers.